Hey everyone, my name is Sarah Gonzalez-Coffin. I'm a third-year PhD student in social psychology, and I'm making this video for STEM Roots in 2023 on how to read a peer-reviewed article in psychology and neuroscience. We're going to primarily focus on empirical articles here, but we'll have some tips for other types of articles like literature reviews, etc. So first, how is the paper organized? Whether it's your first time reading a psychology and neuroscience paper, or you've been reading them a bunch and you're just refreshing, they kind of follow a similar structure that you can use as a formula to pick out the relevant information you need for either your research paper, your study, or maybe you're writing a paper yourself. First will be the abstract, then the introduction, the methods section, results, discussion. There will be references there, as well as sometimes an appendix or supplementary material. And to give us a better sense of what all of this looks like and what these sections are, I like to think of an APA style, particularly an empirical paper, as really similar to an hourglass. So first we start off with the introduction there, where we're giving a broad overview of the research topic. Then we're going through the specific details of what we did and what we found in the methods and results. And then in the discussion section, we have a broad interpretation of what we think all of it means. So really tying that back to the introduction section where we provided all this context about what is this research paper about? And then ultimately the discussion says, here's how we add to the existing literature and here's what all this information means. So really like an hourglass. You'll notice I skipped over the abstract there, and that's because that's going to come at the very beginning and be kind of a summary of this whole hourglass. So giving kind of a sentence for each of these different sections. Here's the information that came before this research project. Here's the details of what we did. Here's what we found, and here's how it fits into the broader literature. So you can think of the abstract as kind of a summary, quick read of the paper, and then each of these sections, you can get more in detail about what specifically the study did. Again, I think I already touched on this, but the appendix or supplementary material section is going to be where maybe additional information about the study is living. So this isn't in every paper. You might see it in some papers, but this could be a place where a survey that you gave to your human subjects, for example, for a psych and neuroscience paper could live there if you wanted to share your survey with other people. And then not to skip over the references, that's really similar to what you may have done in MLA format, perhaps for other papers where you're just providing your citations, except for an APA paper, they will be in APA 7 format. So now that we know a bit about how the paper is organized, what standard sections that we expect to see, and kind of generally what is going to be in each one of these sections, keeping in mind our hourglass here, we can start thinking about which parts of the paper should we read first. So first, we recommend starting with the abstract, and that's the best way, like I mentioned before, to get the overall message of the paper. So you can look for keywords here, both within the abstract, and also at the end of the abstract. Sometimes they will have a little section that says keywords, and they'll put kind of the most relevant keyword information that helps you categorize the paper. And that's really helpful if you want to use those keywords to perhaps search for relevant papers that are really similar. Say you found one and you saw certain keywords like decision making or cooperation, and you're like, oh, I need more papers in this area. This was fantastic. You can use those keywords in your search, and it also helps you too if you're documenting all of your papers to categorize them under certain bins like decision making or social cooperation, because there's a ton of psychology and neuroscience research out there. Next, you want to read your introduction. It's actually best to read these papers in piecemeal because the information is kind of organized in a standard way. And so you can get information in a pretty standardized way as well when you extract it. So consider reading the end of the introduction first, because that's going to be the space where you get the primary goal and the hypotheses about the paper. Then read the rest of the introduction, so more about the theory, why they made certain predictions that they did, so the hypotheses or predictions that these researchers are making in these papers, why, what motivated that, what were the studies that other people did before them to really make them think that that would be something they'd find in this study. So by reading the end of the introduction first, you kind of get to the gist of things of what exactly is this paper about, what is the goal of the paper, and then at that point, once you've checked out the abstract and the introduction, if you feel like this doesn't really speak to the paper that I'm writing, you saved yourself a whole bunch of time having to read through the rest of the paper by kind of checking these key areas first. If you do want to proceed forward, you can also get a really great background literature for the introduction. This is an excellent place to look for further explanation of the techniques, the methodology, the rationale, perhaps, of why the researchers are doing the things that they're going to do in the methods section that follows after this. But the introduction too with this background literature can be a really great place if you feel like, man, I read this paper and this is a fantastic paper. You can look in the introduction for other citations that paper cited. Oftentimes they'll have relevant work or work that helps touch on different points of the paper, maybe that you thought were super strong, whether that is to cite those for your own paper, or maybe you're doing a review, or to kind of write a summary of this paper as well. Whatever your task is, that background literature place is a really good space to source other studies as well. Next comes the discussion. So this is a summary of what was found. Obviously, in terms of order here, this doesn't come next in terms of our hourglass, there we go. But the discussion section of things that you can read next is a really great place to find a summary of what was found. So you just went to the introduction and saw, okay, what are they looking at? Kind of what's the background here? Now you can jump right to the conclusion and see, what did they find? Is this relevant for the paper that I'm writing or whatever situation I'm using it for? Did they actually find support for these things? Or maybe they didn't. Maybe that's something I can talk about in my paper. But it really also provides, puts the results into context and provides a lot of other background information. So you go through the whole process of conducting your study, and now the discussion is saying, okay, here's what it means, and here's how it fits into the rest of the existing literature. So how does it fit in with what we know, whether that's filling a gap of something we didn't know before that helped motivate this study, or if that just means, we didn't find support for this, that's, pretty consistent with what we expected, or maybe we did find support and that's contrary to what we expected based on what other people have done in this area. So it gives you a lot of context and also tells you a really clear and succinct description of the findings. It also addresses concerns about methodology and interpretation. So when you're doing research with human subjects, it's really important to know and make sure that you're being conscious of the fact that the studies are not answering all questions for everybody. A lot of our samples are done in kind of homogeneous populations where it's not including a sample of the whole world or a sample of even the whole United States, or, it's not always representative. So in the discussion section, it tells us here's who these findings are limited to. Perhaps it's a particular group of people that this study was done in, but we don't know if it works for other groups in a psychological intervention, for example, or various real world, situations. Maybe we haven't looked across cultures or things like that. So this tells us about how to interpret the information in the discussion section, who this is relevant to, and maybe who we can't generalize to when we are making inferences about what these results mean, for example. So the methods and results, I've kind of danced around this section, but you can read this one towards the end here. This is going to provide you more details about the number of subjects that were in the study. So how many human subjects participated? What are the variables? So were we looking at psychological well-being? Were we looking at empathy? Were we looking at perspective taking? And who participated in this study? How was the experiment conducted? So what did they have participants to do to test the different things they were looking to test? And then what did they end up finding? So the results section. The results is different from the discussion in that it kind of reports out just the statistics of what they found. If you feel super comfortable with statistics, maybe that's a easier place for you to look. But a lot of the times the results will report out a lot of the statistics and the details there, and the discussion will tell you what all of that means. So looking to the discussion first will help you out a little bit to get a shortcut to that information without having to interpret the stats. Lastly, we look in these sections for, do the results support their hypotheses? So after you took a peek in the introduction and saw what are they looking at, now what did they end up finding? Did that support what they expected? Okay, so where to find particular things? These are just some really common different pieces of information that students look for when reading a empirical article in APA format. So we're going to tell you where to find each one that kind of draws from the previous slides, but is a little bit more specific and may help out with different projects or just your own research as well. So where to find the research question and reason for the study in the introduction section, that gives you the background. So top of our hourglass there. The hypothesis or hypotheses, if they tested multiple hypotheses, that'll be found in the last few sentences of the introduction. How the hypotheses were tested, that's the methods section. So really what procedures did they go through, what measures, etc. All that information will be in the methods section. The findings will be in the results section, so that'll have all your tables and figures if that's helpful to reference. I always like to check out all their tables and figures because sometimes that helps me understand the story as I'm piecing it together and figuring out whether this article works for what I need it to work for, whether that's my own research or for a project in a class. And then this information is usually also summarized in the first sentence of the discussion. Sometimes people will put a quote or something in the discussion. That's becoming less common, but it's usually within the first couple sentences you can find this information there. And then how the findings were interpreted will be in the discussion as well. So what does it all mean and how does it fit back into the existing research that was already there before these researchers came along and did their study? All right, so we're going to look at an example of finding an article. I'm going to share my screen here. You'll have to forgive any open tabs that I have, but we're going to look at the article from Gardner and Bryan in 2017. The article title is called Monetary Incentive Interventions Can Enhance Psychological Factors Related to Fruit and Vegetable Consumption. The journal is in Annals of Behavioral Medicine, a publication of the Society of Behavioral Medicine. You can see the issue number 51 and the volume number 4 in parentheses there. And then we have the page numbers 599 through 609. And the DOI is basically the website address where you can always find this article. And that has a really unique ID number. So you can see those numbers following the DOI.com in the hyperlink there. The authors, I should note this as well because I kind of skipped over this. The first author is Gardner and their initials are CK. And that means in authorship order that they kind of did. Usually it means that you contributed the most or you wrote the most on the manuscript. Perhaps you put in funds, etc. So authorship order does matter in terms of contributions to the paper. And so you'll want to make sure to get those orders correct when you do citations yourself in your paper. And then the second author here, their last name is Bryan. First name or initials are A and D. And then again, the publication year was 2017. So this is an example of APA 7 formatting. Other resources that you can use are Purdue OWL, for example, and we'll make sure that that's on the Canvas page for you as well. But those are really great resources to be able to make sure that you're citing in APA 7 formatting. I say APA 7 because we have had various iterations of APA formatting, really similar to MLA that you might have used in the past. So we're on number 7 right now. In the future, it might be APA 8. So you want to make sure to check Purdue OWL or APA website to make sure that you're using the most updated form of formatting. So what we're going to do, I'm going to show you how to find this article and say, we're going to pretend that we're in a class. I was just assigned this article to read and I have to go find the relevant information here. So here's the first steps that I would take. I'd usually receive the article information in this way in a class in APA 7 formatting, just because professors that's usually how they provide information because they want you to report that citation back to them, usually if they're giving you a summary assignment or something like that. And so I would go into CU Boulder Libraries and Databases. You can bookmark this, or I usually just Google it. Research by subject, psychology and neuroscience, and then we go to ProQuest and advanced search. So I'm going to walk you through what that looks like right now. We're going to find this article. So I'm going to highlight, I like to find articles by their title because I feel like that's the most specific. If you do Gardner and Bryan, maybe they did other papers that same year together in terms of searching the authors and the year, for example. And if you search the journal itself, tons and tons of people publish in the journal. So even if you look at this very specific journal volume and issue, there will be other people who published in it, really similar to a magazine or a book. And so you can think of this as kind of one chapter in their journal volume and issue, for example. It's published in the form of the paper, but you can think of it as a chapter. And so really using the chapter, quote unquote, title is kind of one of the most specific things that you can do in terms of searching. So I'm going to go ahead and follow all the steps that I just told you. So I'll do CU Boulder, libraries and databases. And you can see that here. If you want to bookmark this, I highly recommend. You'll probably come to this a lot if you're involved in research or as you kind of go further in your classes. If you go on to grad school, you'll need kind of your library and databases website for any university you're at. So we'll go down here to research by subject. Note that if you're in a Canvas class, oftentimes they'll have a link to this website in Canvas, so you can check there too. But go to research by subject. We're going to scroll down and you can see here, you can use this for any other classes that you have. So say that you're taking a geology class or physics class or whatever other type of class you decide to take, say you're doing a minor or a second major, all of the research databases are located here. So I'm going to click psychology and neuroscience because that's what I'm showing you today. I'm going to go down to, a lot of these are great. I just have a personal preference for PsycInfo. It takes you to ProQuest, which is kind of the big search engine. It's similar to Google, but academic. So I'm going to go ahead and click that just because I have a preference and feel free to play around with the other ones. Normally it'll prompt you to log in, but I did that before coming here. So your login information is just your identity key through CU. And I'm going to go ahead and paste in the title. So you'll notice here I went to advanced search. That just gives you more options for searching, filtering, deciding what information that this should pull from. If you're searching things for the first time, you can click peer review to make sure that you're getting an empirical article. For the purposes of this recording, I went ahead and already picked a peer-reviewed article, but just to make sure that you're getting one that has reliable information, has gone through the peer review process, etc. And is usually required for classes. Just wanted to flag that for you. But anyway, we can go to this drop down here. And this tells us what information are we searching on. So we talked about keywords earlier. Maybe there's a keyword identifier keyword here that I want to use. For me, I picked document title, so I'm going to go ahead and pick that. There's a ton of other options of things that you could search on, so feel free to play around with this as well. You won't hurt it kind of clicking through. It's just a search engine, so you should be able to try a bunch of different things if you'd like, but I'm going to go ahead and click document title since that's the information I copy pasted from the study I'm looking for, and I'll click search. You can see it popped right up, and CU pays for access to all of these. So if you were just go through Google, you might not have the same access as you do here. So I'm going to go ahead and click on my article. I can see first I want to confirm the information. So Gardner, Casey K, Brian, Angela D. Those are the correct authors. We see volume number 51 and issue number 4, publication year 2017, and we have our DOI there too. So all that information looks super consistent with what we just looked up here. So perfect, we see our abstract. You can see 1 or 2 sentences for each of the different sections. And so part of the reason I picked this paper is because I think they did so great at that. And actually, Angela Bryan is one of our faculty members who is a PI in the CU Change Lab. So this is one of our own. But here you can see in each of the different sections, they have background, a couple sentences on the background, a purpose. So why are we doing this study? Explore the effects of monetary incentives on theoretically informed psychological constructs in fruit and vegetable consumption. So this was a super cool paper that I actually read for a health class that I took in our department. The methods section, so that gives a couple sentences about what they did, how they were randomly assigned to receive either monetary incentives, delayed incentives, or no incentives for their fruit and vegetable consumption over a 3-week period, kind of a little bit about the measures that they had. There's a whole section on results here that tells you a bit about what they found. And then there's a sentence or 2 on conclusion. So what does this actually mean? What does this mean for monetary incentives when it comes to increasing fruit and vegetable behavior? And ultimately, how does that fit back into the literature? So you can go ahead from this point, you can cite. So you can see an APA 7 citation here, or this is a 6. Let me drop down and put the right citation. So you can see you can generate the citation here. So this is super helpful. Say if your professor did not give you the APA citation, but wants you to provide one, you can do it this way through ProQuest, which is really great. You can copy the URL. You can print it, or you can download a PDF copy as well. So say that you really like reading the paper after printing it off. And so here you can see the PDF of the paper that we have. And it has all the information. You can see some keywords there, some funding information, and all the stuff that we saw in the abstract. We can click through here and just see here is the introduction section. So it doesn't say introduction at the top, but it's the first part, thinking back to our hourglass. You can see the methods where they clearly section off design and procedures. Up above at the end of the introduction, you can see the hypotheses and kind of what they expect. So if you want to jump right to that section, you totally can. Results section, you can read about the participants, the baseline measures, the primary outcomes. You'll see a lot of stats there that are reported. Here's all the tables and things as well. And then in the discussion section, notice that there's not a ton of stats here. This is interpreting what all of the information means. So they're talking about contrary to hypotheses, things like that. So they're really couching all of their research and what they just found in the context of what's been done before. And you can see here they have a limitations and future directions section as well. So really, who can we generalize these results to? What were the shortcomings of the study? We can't assume that all studies do things correctly. And so we want to really, we emphasize the transparency when we're writing so other people can replicate what we do. And then so we can look into these studies as well. It's super important to know kind of what what inferences can we make from this study and what inferences can we not make, and be really critical consumers of information. And then at the end here, you'll see the references section where they have all of their citations in APA 7 format. And that's it. So there is no other supplemental material in this article. All right, so let's return to our slides here. So we just looked at our paper, and now I want to provide one more slide on how to write a summary. So pro tip, you can use the same order as the article itself. So state the research question and explain why it's interesting, do about a sentence there. Next, you can state the hypothesis or hypotheses tested if there was more than one, and that can be about a sentence. You can briefly describe the method, so design, participants, materials, procedure, what was manipulated, what was measured, how were data analyzed in 1 to 3 sentences. And then you can describe the results, so what differences were significant, what worked out, what didn't. Like in our study we just found, monetary incentives were successful in encouraging vegetable consumption, and so putting something just as simple as that, 1 to 3 sentences, could be a really great way to write your summary. And then lastly, explain the key implications of the results. So avoid overstating the importance of the findings and saying, for all people everywhere, forever, this is true. But instead, consider saying, for a sample of undergrad participants at University of Colorado Boulder, this intervention found XYZ and was successful for these particular people, for this, age group, for this gender, et cetera. So as specific as you can be with that information. You don't have to dump the entire paper into your summary because you want to keep this to about 1 sentence, but even just kind of precursor information of, this was a sample of all female students at CU Boulder who participated in this study, for example. You want to make it clear who these findings can be generalized to. Wonderful. And that is the end of my tutorial. If you have any other questions, feel free to submit them to the STEM Roots Canvas site, and we are happy to answer your questions. But this has been a summary of how to read peer-reviewed articles in psychology and neuroscience. Thanks for listening.